Women have got this kind of small window in which they're deemed to be at the top of their game, experienced enough to know what they're talking about, but not too old that they're deemed to be out of touch.
Leigh, you're a multi-award winning designer and founder of Sister Mary, which we're going to talk, I'm sure, a lot more about. A creative studio based in New York with a global portfolio of clients, including PepsiCo, Diageo, Labatt and Seagram's Escapes, and amongst other various startups in the beverage and wellness spaces. Previously, you were design director at Fitch, which is obviously now Landor, in London, before moving to New York and joining Vault 49, which is another agency we admire very much, where you progressed to partner and exec creative director, leading accounts like Bailey's and Guinness, again, some of my favourites. And based on that experience, I know you're going to have plenty of insight to share on collaborating with multi-generational and diverse teams. So let's start with your current role. Can you tell me more about Sister Mary and why you founded your own agency?
Throughout my career, really, I've always been a champion for equality in the creative industry. And when I was a younger designer, kind of growing up in the industry, it was very kind of male dominated. And there was very few senior creatives that were female. And as I rose through the ranks, I kind of made it my mission to ensure that the younger female designers around me didn't feel held back by their gender and really kind of believed that they could achieve anything that they wanted to. And, fast forward a few years and I realized that as much as I loved my role at Vault 49 as partner in ECD, I wasn't really completely putting my money where my mouth was. And I wasn't really kind of living into everything that I'd been telling all of these younger women around me. Because ultimately I was still working for two men. I was working for a business that was owned by two guys. And that whole kind of feeling of equity and ownership became increasingly important to me. I spent a lot of time soul searching. I got advice from a ton of amazing people, one of whom was Cindy Gallop, who is an incredible woman. She gave me the kick up the bum that I needed to go and start my own agency. And so after a lot of soul searching and, business planning and thought, I decided to go for it a year and a half ago. And Sister Mary was really kind of founded on two core thoughts. I've always believed that the work that I create and lead inspires brand devotion. The work that I create makes people fall in love with brands, and I even fall in love with the brands that I create. And it's kind of funny. I always joke that I didn't really like Guinness until I started working on the account, and then I completely fell in love with it, and now it's all that I drink. And so there was this idea around creating brands that inspire devotion that I fell in love with. And another thought was that I've always been one of those designers that is quite strategic, but at the same time, I love working with raw creatives and artists and illustrators, and that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about Volt. So I really believe in the most powerful work is created when art and strategy combine and merge and feed each other and don't follow a kind of linear process. So, the power of art, the beauty of ideas, that's what we talk about when we talk about Sister Mary, and that kind of meshing of strategy and business and raw creativity is really at the kind of center of what Sister Mary is all about. And then everyone always asks me about the name. There's a great story behind the name. Naming your own agency, by the way, there's a lot of pressure on it because
I cannot imagine. Yes, I don't envy you.
I know, because there's no going back. Once you make that commitment, that's it. So I thought a lot about it. I actually went on amazing vacation for 2 weeks, and that was one of the main things that I was thinking about. Drove my boyfriend nuts. Sister Mary Carita Kent is a pop artist, a nun, and an activist, and I've been obsessed with her since I was a teenager. Primarily when I was younger, because I just loved the vibrancy and the colorfulness and the spirit of the art that she created. And then the more I kind of uncovered about her story, the more I realized that actually she was an advocate for women's rights back in the 60s. She used to protest about even things like the habits that nuns were asked to wear. She was like, this is getting in the way of me being able to teach art. It's getting in the way of me being able to drive my car. And she was a real badass, and she was rebellious, and she stood up for what she believed. And I just wanted to kind of try and harness that spirit, like the way that she worked, the passion that she had. So I just landed on Sister Mary as a name, as a tribute to her. And it also works really beautifully in like kind of giving me my North Star for inspiration every day. Every day when I wake up and I see the name Sister Mary, it reminds me of why I'm doing this and what my inspiration has been. And it's really energizing.
Leigh, thank you so much. I think that we put a lot of pressure on those eureka moments in creative roles, right? But to know that you have had that idea and that stayed with you for so many years means it's super powerful. So I love that story. And with great embarrassment, I will share with you that tried to found my own agency straight out of university,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was obviously terrible in many, many ways. But it was super fun. And I think it really highlighted the fact that me and the graduates and my peers at the time felt like there wasn't much opportunity. When I was at uni, there was one agency that was mentioned outside of London, which I got a job at about a year later.
Oh, wow.
So it really felt like the only options were to work there or to start your own thing. That was really encouraged. And I wondered, how did it feel when you were in the very early stages of your career? Was founding your own agency something that you always had in mind?
No. Oh my God, no. And it's really funny. Like, I was talking to someone about this recently. When I started working as a junior designer, I think that this was partly because there wasn't really many role models around me. I had no ambition above becoming a senior designer. I was like, if I make it to senior designer, I'll be quite happy. And then I became senior designer. So then I was like, wow, maybe I could actually become a design director. And then that happened, and then I became more and more senior, and I eventually reached the stage where I was like, well, the natural thing to do next is to found my own agency. But back then, it didn't seem like an option, and I've thought about it, and I think it was mainly because I didn't see any women around me over the age of about 30 or 35 succeeding in the industry. I saw women leave the industry to go and have children in their early 30s and return to work, but they weren't treated the same way. They were kind of almost held back by the fact that they had to leave on time because, back then the industry was very different, and we were almost expected to do 16-hour days on the regular.
Yeah.
And of course, as a mother, that's just not a practical thing to do. And I think that held a lot of women back, and I saw that happening. So that kind of framed my expectations in a way. And I just thought that it wasn't an option to stay in the creative industry over the age of about 35.
That's terrible, isn't it?
Uh,
Oh, it is scary. I mean, last time we spoke, you introduced me to the narrow window phenomenon, which is where women under 30 are considered too inexperienced to lead, and women over 40 are seen as out of touch, leaving only this really small window in which women are perceived as viable leaders. Do you see that today in the design industry?
I do. And it's frustrating because I felt as though I was seen to be kind of too inexperienced until I was around my kind of early 30s. I have memories of leading a project and being the one to present the work to the client. And when they would respond and give feedback, they would speak to my male boss. And it was really weird. I'm like, I'm
No.
here. And what I found difficult was I couldn't really work out if it was because of my gender or because I was deemed to be too inexperienced. And I think that that's a really challenging thing about being young or old and female, because you never really know what bias is at work. Is it age or gender? And then, there has been, horrified to say, a couple of instances reasonably recently where I've almost been kind of felt as though I'm too old. Like, I was asked the other day if I was able to design for a Gen Z audience, and I'm like, yes.
Oh my
It's our
God.
it's our job as creatives to be able to design for all manner of different consumer groups. You know, when I was in my early 20s, I was working with Lucky Strike and designing car liveries for Formula One. It was a very male-dominated industry. I've designed for Guinness, that was a very kind of masculine brand at the time that we worked on it. So, you know, as creatives, I think that it's our responsibility to be able to design for all manner of different consumer groups. Yes, I 100% have felt as though I'm too young and too old. And I feel as though there was a sweet spot between like 35 and 40. And when you consider how many years of your life you spend working, it's so unfair that I feel
Yeah.
women have got this kind of small window in which they're deemed to be at the top of their game, experienced enough to know what they're talking about, but not too old that they are deemed to be out of touch. And it's something that I'm now making it my new mission to try and kind of help people overcome. I feel as though we as a society is slowly tackling issues around diversity. And I think that ageism is almost like the last taboo that really needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, which is why I'm so grateful to be having this chat with you. How did you overcome when you were younger any of those feelings? Like, is there any practical advice you can share around doing that?
I only really experienced that a handful of times. And I honestly believe that there isn't much that you can do to overcome bias that someone has that they're not necessarily aware of. I mean, I guess in hindsight, I could have just had the courage to have a very frank conversation with them. But, you know, when you're in your 20s or 30s, that's a very kind of intimidating thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a difficult conversation to have. I guess, like, at the time, my way of dealing with it was to express my frustrations to the kind of male superiors in the room that seemed to kind of almost be looked at for reassurance and that kind of level of seniority because I was deemed to be a little bit too young, and kind of explain my frustrations. And then they would make a point of kind of including me in the conversation and diverting questions back to me. Because I do think that one thing that I love about the creative industry is that, and I think that I've been fortunate in the studios that I've worked at, there is a real sense of kind of teamwork and collaboration. And I
Yeah.
believe that if you have a really solid team of people around you and you can speak to them about some of the frustrations that you're dealing with and some of the biases that you might feel that you're being exposed to, that they can have your back.
And what about then, this is a personal question, the times where you mentioned you felt too old more recently? What were those moments?
I was speaking to a friend of mine about this the other day, and she was like, "Wow, this is really, you're really holding on to this, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because I'm kind of frustrated, and I don't want to feel as though this is going to become a conversation that is like that I'm going to continue to have in the future."
Yeah.
Because I'm 46 and I'm not ashamed of that. And I don't want to feel as though I have to start hiding my age or pretending that I'm younger. And I do feel as though other women in their 40s and 50s and even 60s might feel that way. And I think that that's a terrible position to be in. And I think it hurt a nerve because I all of a sudden started to think, do I have a kind of sell by date? Is the career that I'm in love with and I'm so passionate about, and I've only just started my own agency, is there going to be a kind of cutoff point that I almost become irrelevant in the eyes of my clients? Because essentially, it doesn't matter what I think. If the clients that we're working with have that point of view, that's something that I need to help them overcome. How did I deal with that in the time? I had a glass of wine. I had a very strong
That's
word
how
with
I deal
myself.
with things.
But I reminded myself that like Sister Mary is bigger than me, and I'm not the one that is going to be doing all of the design work. Like I love that it's a smaller agency than previous places that I've worked, and I am able to be more hands-on. But the design team that I'm working with are from all age groups, from early 20s to early 40s, and they bring in different perspectives. Like the majority of the designers that we're working with at the moment are Gen Z. So if we're designing for a Gen Z audience, of course they can help to kind of shape that work. So reminding myself of that, again, similar to the last issue, like realizing that you're not in this alone and you're part of a bigger team,
Yeah,
I think is the way that you kind of overcome a lot of these challenges.
that's really nice. I think it's really interesting, like you say, to think about how in design, someone who's outdated or considered to be feeling that way in another industry is established. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to think about the difference that age has per industry as well. Like an architect who's 50, you think, wow, they must have achieved so much in that time. And sometimes the reaction can be to someone who's 60 in design is like, how are they doing that? Because there aren't that many people still proactively working in it as a kind of an invisible set of people at that age group in design. So it's really important to
Mm.
highlight it.
And I also think that it's worse for women who are older. Like I know so many men in their 50s and 60s that are still active and respected in the industry, less so for women. And I've actually got a funny story about this. So after we spoke last time, I asked ChatGPT. So up to you whether how believable you think that their responses are and how much the response can be trusted. I asked it, for a woman over 40, is it more likely that they would get a career as a supermodel or a creative director? And guess what it said? Supermodel. Because apparently the modeling industry has become much more aware of some of the kind of challenges around diversity, more so than the creative industry, which is shocking. When I read
Oh
that,
my
I was like,
God.
it's terrifying. But yeah, I'm grateful that people like yourself and Craft are allowing a platform and talking about this because like I said, I do feel as though ageism is the last taboo to be tackled.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, okay, interesting career path from DD to supermodel to ECD. Who knew that's coming soon? I love it. I mean, we talk about diverse backgrounds, and if supermodels are coming in, they're very welcome in the world of design. So, yeah, that is very shocking and fascinating. I mean, you mentioned before that you felt like there was a sweet spot for yourself that was 35 to 40. You sort of felt like you were there a little bit. Would you say there's a peak age for working in design today, if we're really brutally honest about it?
No. And just to clarify, like when I say the peak age, that was the peak age that was my understanding from other people. Like I feel that I am as creative, if not more creative now than I have ever been in my career. So no, I don't think that there is a kind of ideal age to be a designer. I feel as though your skills kind of evolve over time. I feel as though when you're younger, you do tend to express a little bit more bravery. And I feel as though like you kind of almost put up less barriers to ideas that you have. And that comes from an experience. Like you can kind of think up these crazy, wild, out there ideas because you're you have less experience and you're less concerned with things like, is this going to be good for the business? Is this going to be good for bottom line? Is this answering the brief? And I think that as you get older, maybe some of your ideas are a little bit less out there because you are thinking about the kind of more commercial side of what you're doing. So I would say that it's always really important to have a balance of different age ranges and levels of experience within a team for that reason. I think that what you bring to the table evolves and changes over time. So no, I think that the input and the value that someone in their early 20s can bring is equally important to someone in their 50s or 60s. I think it's just different. And that's why I think it's important to have a completely mixed team.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point because the careabouts of those different age ranges are so vast. And in your role, obviously, as founder, you've got your business to care for, but you're really invested therefore in your clients' businesses because that's obviously why you do what you do to make a difference creatively to their challenges. So I can imagine how the weight of responsibility is at odds with that naivety and perhaps playfulness that a younger designer might have.
100%.
Are there any other, let's say, naive or youthful qualities that you wish you could bring with you as you develop your career?
One thing that I would say, one thing that I'm jealous of, I don't know if there's anything that I necessarily miss, because I think everything that I feel is really important for me to do a good job, I've kind of made an effort to retain. One thing that I'm jealous of younger people coming into the industry is how diverse their skill sets are, and
Okay.
how, I mean, God, this is going to really age me, but when I went to university, we didn't even use Macs until our third year. Everything was created by hand for the first 2 years. And now I feel as though like kids that are 5 years old are so kind of tech savvy that by the time they get to university, they're an absolute whiz. So when they leave university, what I'm finding is that graphic designers also have motion skills, or they can code, and like their skill set is much broader. I wish that I was part of that generation for that reason. I'm trying to kind of diversify my technical abilities now, and it does get a little bit more challenging. So there's part of me that's like, Leigh, it's okay. You don't need to learn to code in your 40s. You can hire someone to do that. But yeah, I do have a little bit of jealousy around how tech savvy and diverse the skill sets are of young designers in their 20s. I
That
wish that we
really
had more
speaks
of
to
that.
me. Yeah, digital native aspect, I suppose, of that age group means that they're very adaptive to like learning new skills and that sort of thing. But learned experience and cultural experience means that you also have that resilience and that ability to adapt, obviously, that the younger people don't have. So it's a similar skill set, I feel, just different applications.
Yeah.
But that also speaks to the kind of cultural pulse that you need to be so aware of, especially creating and evolving brands in the beverage and wellness spaces. Obviously, they're a real kind of measure of what's cool and what's culturally relevant at the moment, and that sort of thing. How do you stay current in what you do?
I think that having a kind of a broad age range of people in your team really helps. It's impossible for me to stay up to date on every single topic and every single trend that are relevant for our clients. So it's very much a kind of shared responsibility of everyone that works at Sister Mary to kind of bring their thoughts and ideas and kind of cultural references to the table, and stay on top of things like that. I would also say that like living in New York is so incredibly useful in terms of staying in touch with culture. We're surrounded by like amazing brand activations and pop-up and retail experiences. And, New York is always very much on the kind of cutting edge of what's new. So I feel incredibly fortunate that if I am feeling a little bit uninspired, or I'm feeling a little bit like I need to get back in touch with the world, all I need to do is kind of go into the city and just immerse myself in everything that's amazing about this incredible melting pot. But I feel as though there are some things that about what we do that don't necessarily change with time. Like I believe that the power of the big idea and the way that we build brands, in essence, is kind of timeless. And I think that that connection that we're always trying to build between brands and audiences is something that hasn't changed over time. The mediums that we use to communicate to those brands, of course, are always in flux, and the trends that we tap into are constantly changing. But yeah, I think it's really important to just kind of hold on to that fact that not everything is changing around us all the time. And I think that if you do kind of get swept up in that, you kind of lose your North Star and your anchor in a way. So very careful to like not lose sight of the power of the big idea, and make sure that everything that we do is really rooted in a strategic brand truth. Because I think that if you do allow yourself to kind of get swept away by like what's new and trending and the latest cool thing, then you're just creating stuff that is ephemera, that is going to be like forgotten in a few years' time.
Oh my God, totally. Yeah, that's what I fell in love with about branding and what I hold so dear to me, to be honest, is that it's building something long term. Like the time some projects that I've run have taken 18 months. If we'd have done that, for building a brand, that's nothing, and that's what's necessary to do the research, all the wonderful stuff that goes into it. If that was a social media project, we'd be laughing at ourselves a month down the line about what we were thinking. It's flat, and it's hard when you're really building something. Of course, that takes time, and that's the wonderful thing about it. Thinking about you mentioned what you sort of have a slight bit of jealousy about in younger creatives is this technical kind of intuition that they've grown up to have. What qualities do you see in older people that you think are super, super valuable? People older than you or people in your own peer group?
Confidence is something that has really come with age. I feel as though, like, sometimes I think that I have intuition and, like, I kind of instantly know what the right solution is, and that's by some kind of super magical power that I have, but it isn't. Intuition is essentially experience. Because once you've done something a few times, it just becomes second nature. So I would say, like, experience just kind of gets you to solutions really quickly. So that's something that's come with age. I would also say that I have much greater perspective. And I remember as I was working my way up as a junior designer, I would get quite anxious and always think that my work wasn't good enough. And I would work all hours trying to get better. And my boss at the time always used to say to me, Leigh, no one's going to die. It's not heart surgery. And that was what I always used to tell myself when I had those moments of anxiety. And now I've gotten older, I do feel as though I've got much more perspective. I also think that management, like it or not, when you're dealing with clients and you're working in a fast-paced environment, there are going to kind of be those moments where you have to really work hard to solve a problem or, manage conflict or reach a solution that everyone's happy with. And I do believe that that's something that I've become better at as I've gotten older,
Yeah.
being able to be that calm person at the table that manages to solve the problem, manage the client, dissolve the conflict and move forward. I feel as though when I was younger, I was a little bit more kind of reactive and jittery and like didn't really know how to move forward. I feel much more balanced and level-headed now, I would say.
That's such a strength, and I really feel like every room needs that because creativity and design is so exciting. You easily get carried away. I think it's important to have a sort of grounding presence who, like you say, has the brief front of mind and the client in mind. How do you then create an environment that balances that, naivety and youthful energy and that sort of genuine, grounded aspect of things? Like, how do you manage a team that is so diverse but is heading in the right direction together?
I think the most important thing is to always make people feel as though they have a voice. And it can be a little bit trickier when we're working remote. And System Area is still fully remote. Fingers crossed we'll get a studio in a couple of months.
Nice.
That's what we're hoping for. Because I do think that in person is really important. And I think that when you're in person, you can actually create that physical space for collaboration. Because yes, making sure that everyone around the table feels that they're heard, very much like it's so important to me because there has been times when I've been younger that I haven't felt as though I've been heard. So ensuring that the culture feels very open, that you collaborate on everything that you work on. I know that some agencies almost kind of have designers competing against each other.
Mm.
And that's the type of environment that I really don't want to create because that's when I feel as though you're almost kind of pitting people against each other and it becomes really competitive and anxiety inducing. So the way that we work is very collaborative. The work is owned by everyone. No one kind of like has their little baby and their little baby. Like it's shared between the entire team. And I think that just creates an environment that everyone feels as though they have a really important part to play. And they do. So yeah, just encouraging collaboration and openness and never speaking someone down and saying, that's a shit idea. Like
Yeah.
always seeing the positive and building on their ideas is really important. And I have to say, and this might be a little bit sexist of me to say it, but I think that having a female leadership team helps to kind of create that type of environment as well. I think that women are naturally a little bit more understanding and empathetic. It might be a little bit sexist of me to say that, but with everything that's going on in the world right now, I feel as though we've got to like speak up a little bit more. So there it is, recorded.
I like it. I agree with you. I mean, I've been very fortunate being in studios that do have really powerful women leaders, and it means a lot. It really does make a difference to the way that you behave and the way that you learn as well. Like, I've always felt quite comfortable to fail, and I'm really appreciative of that. And I'm sure it's helped me develop. So I think it's important to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm glad that you've found that as well. Yeah, I think it's really important, and I was fortunate that I had like male feminists kind of guiding me as I was a young designer. When I was super junior, I felt as though because the more senior women had to deal with so much bullshit and they'd really had to kind of fight their way to the top, there was a certain level of bitterness about it. And I completely understand why. I'm glad that things are changing, and I'm glad that there are much more kind of women in creative leadership positions now than there was a few years ago. Because I do think, like you said, I think it changes the energy in the room and it creates a kind of quite a different environment for learning.
Totally. I mean, it's easy to take some of our bad experiences forwards with us, but I'm pleased that, people are learning to develop and change for the better.
Yeah.
Sister Mary has a leadership team of women. How differentiating is that in today's design landscape?
I would say it's quite unusual. Having a leadership team, I would say, isn't hugely unusual. Having an ECD who is female is less common, but it's really improving, which is amazing. But having a woman-owned agency, I would say, is incredibly rare. The latest statistics, I think, said that still under 1% of creative agencies are owned by women. And I do believe that there's a really huge difference between leadership and ownership. It kind of irritates me when I hear men that own design studios talking about how many women they have in leadership positions, because like ownership and leadership are two very different things.
Yeah.
And I think that we need more women to have equity and ownership of agencies. But I guess the important thing is, so it's quite unusual, but I think, is it good for clients is the most important thing. Is it differentiating when it comes to delivering great work? And it's something that we've talked about at Sister Mary quite a lot, because it's like, how much do we want to shout about the fact that we're woman-owned, female-led? Like, does it really matter to clients? And I think that yes, it could, when you think about like things like 80% of purchasing decisions are led by women. Like, maybe it helps if you've got more women in the team to kind of create those brands that are serving those audiences. So yes and no. We don't kind of shout it from the rooftops, because I I don't want to I don't want Sister Mary to necessarily be sexist. And I
Yeah.
don't want us to win work due to positive discrimination, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, but I do believe, like we were just talking about previously, that having kind of a woman-led leadership team does bring a more kind of collaborative approach to our ways of working and the way that we support each other. And, we very much lead with empathy and collaboration at the core. And I think that is part and parcel of being kind of led by women. So yeah, I would say yes, it's way too uncommon for an agency to be owned by women. And I'm kind of on a mission to kind of drive up that number. But I don't necessarily want Sister Mary to just be famous for being female owned, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like, I want to win work because we're amazing at what we do, regardless of our gender.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see that success already. So you're obviously achieving that. But let's talk more about then your ownership and obviously being the founder of your own studio, because when you kindly completed our Design Next survey, there was a question about what advice would you have given yourself 10 years ago? And you said start your own agency now. So What
I
was
know,
there
it kind of
something?
contradicts everything that I've been saying about it. I don't feel too old. Yeah, I wish I'd done it 10 years ago.
Well, we can say that about lots of things, of course. But I mean, was there anything holding you back?
Yes, it's such an interesting question. Yeah, yes. And there was practical things that were holding me back, and the more that I thought about it, I also think that there were emotional things holding me back. On a practical level, I obviously am not born in New York. I'm not born and bred American. So I was tied to my visa at my previous role. I had to wait to get a green card. There was all of those practical reasons that I couldn't have done it sooner. And I do think that if I'd stayed in London, I probably would have started my own agency earlier on. Like
Okay.
starting a business in a foreign country takes some courage.
Yeah, yeah, I bet.
So yeah, there was practical reasons for it. But I also think, like emotionally, I didn't feel ready until a year and a half ago. Because as I said previously, like I found that my confidence has grown with time and with experience and with age. And as a result of like each achievement that I've kind of made, I look back and I think, oh my God, wow, I did that. Maybe I can do this and maybe I can do that. And life is such a journey. And I really do believe that there are no limits to what you can do if you don't overthink it. And I think that that is what was holding me back. I think that I was overthinking everything. Like I was worrying about like, well, what if it doesn't make it? Maybe I just need to like, you know, get a bit more experience in this area. Maybe I need to, better understand the legal side of things or the financial side of things or the operational side of things before I take that leap. And I think that that is something that naturally comes from being a woman. I think that men are a little bit braver with regard to that. They're like, let's just take the leap and we'll figure it out along the way. And I think that women are a little bit more kind of nervous and calculating and think, oh, I just want to learn a little bit more about that before I kind of have the guts to do it. So, yeah, there is a part of me that thinks, I wish I'd done it a little bit sooner. I wish that I'd had that kind of confidence and that guts to take the leap. But I have no regrets, really. Like, I think that it felt like the right time. It feels like the right time. I don't know if I would have been able to deal with some of the kind of challenges that I've had to deal with 10 years ago. I don't think that I was fully equipped, and now I do.
I'm really pleased to hear that, honestly, because I really agree with your point about, women are inherently perhaps a bit more, I think you said calculating. I think that that's a really good way of putting it. And we see that actually in recruitment as well, is that I think it's fair to say that men feel more ready more quickly to take a step up. Whereas women need to feel like they're a bit more like they're doing the job already and very well equipped before making like a leap, and I've always felt that as well, so that really speaks to me. But it's interesting because obviously you seem invincible, but, on paper, do you know what I mean? Your career is so impressive and what you're doing now is so impressive that it's really heartening to hear that, you did it when you felt ready, and you did have these questions and, it's really easy to overthink things and to the point where I don't actually know how you do it. Like founders, I don't know how you do it.
I mean, it was a long starting Sister Mary took 3 years of thought, and I went back and forth in my mind. I have to say, it was an hour conversation that I had with Cindy Gallop that finally gave me the push over the edge. And what she said to me will always stay with me. Essentially, she said to me, like, what is holding you back from starting your own agency? Like, why have you not done this already? And I was like, well, I've got a mortgage and I have a dog and I've got all these financial commitments. And, where I am right now, I feel like I've got job security. And she said to me, right now, you're putting your future in the hands of two men. Like, what is going to give you more job security than taking ownership over your destiny and having it in your own hands? And I was like, oh my God. It was like something clicked. I'm like, she's absolutely right. I need to like take charge of my own future and my own destiny. And that is the most secure place that I can put myself because I don't trust anyone more than I trust myself.
Yeah.
And that was such good advice. But I have to say, I don't know. I probably still would be thinking about it if she hadn't said those words to me that day.
Well, of course. I mean, it's hard to give yourself a push or make a leap, isn't it? Especially like you say, when you've got responsibilities and finances to think about and that sort of thing. You can see how, and I'm not saying this is your experience, but you can see how people can feel a little bit trapped sometimes by the
Mhm.
career that they're in. So, is there any advice then that you would pass on to women in their 40s who want to make a leap, perhaps into a different career or a different path, or to take their destiny into their own hands a little bit more?
One huge thing that I've learned since starting Sister Mary, which is funny, like living in New York, which has got a huge population, it's full of people, especially in the creative industry, which is thriving over here. In my previous role, I felt like I wasn't really getting out there and meeting new people and networking enough. And since starting Sister Mary, I've been doing that tons because it is so important to kind of grow your network. And I have found so much support from people that are new in my life. Support from one woman, Julia Beardwood, who started her own agency 20 years ago, like reached out to me and said, if there's anything that I can do to help, if there's any advice that I can give you, let me know, which is the most kind, generous thing in the world. And conversely, people have put me in touch with other women that are thinking about starting their own agency. And I've been so keen to like meet up, have a coffee, help them in any way, give them any advice that I can. So I would say any advice, and regardless of gender, I know that I keep speaking about women, but I like honestly, regardless of gender, I would say like reach out to people, speak to other people about their experience, get in touch with people that you admire, because you will be surprised how keen people are to help other people. And I think that through conversation and through hearing people's stories and how they've kind of overcome challenging times, all of a sudden it doesn't feel so intimidating.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I would say that's helped me enormously, and I would advise anyone in a similar situation to yeah, just build your network and don't be afraid to kind of send that message on LinkedIn and say, if you've got 30 minutes, I'd really love your thoughts on A, B, and C, because they will probably say yes, sure, let's do it.
I love that, and that's I mean, it's testament to this conversation because that's, I think, how we got in touch. So, yeah, it's a wonderfully supportive place, I feel, the design industry, and it's a small circle as well, really. So, the network, as you mentioned, is super important. Let's go back to the start and think about, when you started your career and how different the landscape was then. You touched on a couple of practical things of how it's different. What advice would you give young creatives now that will help them cut through and achieve success?
One thing that I've noticed about myself throughout my career is that I've always been really brave in kind of asking for what I want or asking what I need to get there. So I would encourage young creatives to do the same, to not be nervous about having that difficult conversation with, someone more senior to yourself. If you're working on something that you're really frustrated with and you're struggling with, speak up about it. If you feel as though you deserve a promotion, speak up about it. Like, don't hold these things in yourself and don't allow those frustrations to build. And I don't think that you necessarily need to be a really loud, outspoken person in order to be brave in that way. I think that even if you're introverted, because I was painfully quiet when I was in my 20s, but I was still able to have those tricky conversations. And it opened so many doors for me because so often when you're working in a kind of busy studio environment, your creative director or your senior designer won't necessarily know some of the struggles that you're going through. So it's really important to just be as open and honest as you can and just stay in touch with people around you because everyone is rooting for you and it is very much a kind of a team effort. So yeah, I would say don't be afraid to ask for what you want. Just do it nicely.
That is great advice. I love that. That really speaks to me as an introvert as well, by the way, because I have struggled with that at some points throughout my career and been told I'm quiet and that sort of thing. And it's something that comes with time, as does
Yeah.
confidence and all that good stuff. I wanted to end on a question about legacy because I feel like it's kind of an inherently kind of masculine thing to leave a legacy. There aren't many statues of women that have achieved loads of things. you obviously have your opportunity now as a founder, as an owner of your own business, to leave your legacy creatively and as a leader. What would you like your legacy to be?
Oh, wow. What a question. I hope that Sister Mary does bold and brave enough work that gets noticed by other young creatives coming up in the industry, that inspires them to be equally brave and start their own business and do what they love. I would love to see more kind of gender equality in terms of agency ownership, and if we could get a little bit above 1% and maybe nudge it up to like 20 or 30% in a few years' time, that would be an amazing legacy for me to leave. And getting there through doing work that kind of surprises and delights and inspires people, I think would be an amazing legacy to leave.
Absolutely, and you're well on your way there. It's giving brave, it's giving bold. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed our chat again, and really appreciate your perspective on how we can best leverage a super diverse and incredible design scene. So thank you, Leigh.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our chat as well.